Day by day, little by little, we write the story of our lives. Join author Joe Alch on a walk down memory lane with tenacious humans who didn't let their circumstances dictate their life and what they could become. Welcome to the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast.
Hi, I have a very special guest today, my friend and a awesome author, Mike Maden, who's here today. Mike, we've been friends for 15 years. Just hard to believe. But we are here today to talk about your book and your journey. And my podcast is Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage. Although your book is not a memoir, I want you to share about it, share about your struggles, your courage and writing, and just how you can encourage fellow writers. So tell me quickly about the book, Enemy Contact.
Yeah, Enemy Contact is the latest book in the Tom Clancy franchise. This is the third one I've written in the series. Enemy Contact itself, if you know the Tom Clancy world, it's an action sort of military techno thriller. The Junior series, which is what I write and comes out every summer, is centered more on the son of the iconic president, Jack Ryan Sr. He's the son of the president who's involved with an organization called The Campus, which is a private, off-the-books security firm that does work for the president when the government can't do it. And in this particular book, Jack Ryan Jr. We follow him racing across two continents. First of all, as he's battling to keep a deathbed promise to an old friend. But at the same time, he's fighting to save NATO and the West from a very aggressive Chinese plot that's actually based in Poland, where my wife and I traveled last year to do research, which is awesome. And if that wasn't enough, he's also trying to thwart a brilliant hacker's murderous assault on the American intelligence community. So on the one hand, really big action, which is what the genre expects. It's one of the conventions. I love the genre. It's a lot of fun. It's really a popcorn entertainment kind of book with really big stakes. But for this particular book, I was trying to go deeper, both for myself as an artist and a writer, but also in terms of the character. And so his deathbed promise is made to, and it's not really a spoiler, to a fellow that's his age, who's actually an orphan. And so if Jack doesn't keep this promise, nobody's going to know. So there's actually no stakes involved, seemingly. But really, for Jack, it's a matter of his personal honor. And if he can't keep a promise, in fact, that's the biggest stakes of all. And that's the kind of thing that we don't normally see in this kind of genre. So it's something I wanted to play with and really push forward. I hope it's successful. I hope it works.
Yeah, I know it will. And you've been here. You're here in Dallas. You had a book signing last night. And, everybody's question has got to be, what's it like working with Tom Clancy? So tell me, what is it like writing for Tom Clancy?
Yeah, it's like I won the lottery 3 times in a row. It's a tremendous privilege and honor. I have read military and techno thrillers most of my life. Like a lot of Tom Clancy fans, I first discovered him reading The Hunt for Red October, which just absolutely blew me away. He really elevated the technology to really a character. Before Tom Clancy, most technical descriptions were pretty generic and sloppy. And so the hero would rush into a room with a gun and would fire. Now the hero, dashes in the room with a Glock 19, slams home the 15-round 9mm magazine. So he brought that kind of specificity to it. And when he wrote the book that came out in the 80s, U.S. military was still held in some disregard. And he really reminded us of the quiet professional heroism of really all who serve, not just the people who are jumping out of airplanes, who are awesome, or the fighter pilots, but the sonar operators and the intelligence analysts. And he just really paid homage to a community that we owe so much to. And so besides giving us really a brand new genre, he also reminded us of, who the best of us really are. And we're all indebted to that. So when I suddenly get this phone call from Tom Colgan, who is the series editor for the whole Clancy franchise, would you like to do this? I mean, it was the greatest literary day of my life. I mean, what an honor, what a privilege. And so I hung up the phone, and instantly became the most terrifying day of my literary life, because now I actually have to write one. And it's sort of like the Queen of England calling you up and saying, do you mind adding a few lines of dialogue to the St. Crispin Day speech in Henry V or something? It's like, yeah, sure. But if you're a writer, you write. And if you're not really writing through your fears and through your beyond your current skill sets, then you're not growing as an artist or as a disciple. So, took the challenge. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Just working as an author myself and writing a book, it's taken a lot of time. And, every sentence you second guess, could I say this better? Or could I word this better? Or, so tell me.
And the answer is yes. It's always yes.
I know.
Of course you can.
I know. Tell me about your journey as a writer, because I know you just didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to write for Tom Clancy, and here you go. Here's the phone call. So talk about your journey as a writer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to steal a line from Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote Wrinkle in Time and many other books. People call her a children's author. She said she was never a children's author. She just wrote books that children happened to love, that were also very smart. And she was a woman of faith. And she has a line, and let me just sort of crib it and change it. But she said, every definition I have for being a disciple is the same definition I have for being a writer. And really any kind of an artist. I mean, both take strength and energy and courage and faith and self-forgiveness and time on your knees. But at the end of the day, being a disciple means being obedient to the call in your life. And I was 40 years old when I knew, in that way that you can only know, if you're following, that I was supposed to start writing fiction. And I had an argument. And I said, I don't think so, Lord. This doesn't make any sense to me. I've got a master's degree and a PhD in political science. I've got a 4-year THM in theology. I know better. And I really, it was one of those moments in my life where it's like, either you're going to be obedient or you're not. And so I said, okay. So with no expectations of any kind of success or that anything would ever get made, I started writing screenplays, in part because that was the work I was involved with an organization called Common Grace Ministries. I was hanging out with young actors and people wanted to write or direct. So how can I walk with them in that journey if I'm not doing it myself? And so just by being faithful to that initial call, having no expectations other than obedience was the reward. Then the labor is the reward. I set off, and that actually, I now look back and say that freed me up to say yes is the most powerful thing you can do in the universe. And it was kind of funny because after I said yes to that, and I look back, I realized I've been writing my whole life, yet mostly nonfiction, but I really was a writer. But in some ways, I had to be given permission. I had to give myself permission to say yes, I am a writer, and then launch off, knowing nothing about it, but excited about trying to learn it.
That's awesome. And, I felt the same way, really, about writing my story. But before that, I have a business, and I was out in California. I was at this big church in California, Saddleback, Rick Warren's church, and his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, had just come out, and I read it, and I'm like, what is my purpose? I just don't really know what my purpose is. And it was really as if he tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, I've got this, I started a business. I started on faith. I never took out any loans. I was like, okay, Lord, if you think I can do this, and it's grown and it's given me a platform. It's allowed me time to write my story. And so, I really am so big on following. We all have a purpose, and the purpose, it can be fearful. You can be fearful along the way, So tell me, have you had to make sacrifices in this journey?
Well, I mean, the short answer, I suppose, is yes. My hands aren't exactly calloused and blistered from all of the effort it takes to type on a word processor. but it is the sacrifice of time. And again, stealing from other people's work, because T.S. Eliot said mediocrity borrows and genius steals. So I'm going to go for the stars and steal. But there's a book called The Eighth Day of Creation by Elizabeth O'Connor, which I'm a big fan of. And one of the statements in there is that once you name your gift, once you name your calling, you have to forego many other wonderful and amazing possibilities. And I've met people along my journey who said, yeah, I mean, I want to write, but I also want to be a photographer, but I also want to be a musician, but I also want to, and I also want to, and I also want to. And what they're really saying is, I'm not willing to commit to this one thing. And yes, it's partly because they really do love all these other things, and creative people do love, I mean, I love more than writing. I love more than the arts. I mean, I love my wife. I mean, there's lots of things I love. But at some point, you have to sit, if you're going to be a writer, it's the old derriere in the chair principle. You sit and you write. And when people ask me conversationally, let's say on the airplane or something, what do you do? I often say, probably inappropriately, I sit in a room by myself and talk to imaginary people. So that really is what I do. And so I get many invitations to do all kinds of fun and cool things. I have to say no, because my job is to write. So the full-on commitment is to lay your hand on the plow, to not look back over your shoulder, to not say, let me go bury my dad. It's to lay your hand and move forward. And so you do it with no expectation other than it's a, yes, Lord, this is the call. And I say yes. And whatever the outcome is, it's in his hands, not mine.
That's awesome. And you have an awesome wife who I know has supported you every step of the way. And she's amazing. What about fears? Have you had fears as a writer? Even now, writing with Tom Clancy, I would be intimidated, but talk to me about any fears and how you've been able to overcome those fears.
In terms of the Clancy franchise, I mean, I was a fan and a reader of Tom Clancy before I was ever asked to write it. And so, you just don't want to break it. You don't want to mess it up. And there are legions of fans out there that go all the way back to day one. The last thing I'd ever want to do is disappoint them or let them down or hurt the franchise. So yes, a tremendous responsibility. So I'm very mindful of the fans and very I have a deep respect and a love for the franchise. And so I would never intentionally do anything to harm it. Having said that, though, like you said, you second guess yourself all the time when you're writing, which is why when you write, you got to turn off the editor and let the child in you play and create. And after you sort of scatter the paints all over the walls and mush the clay up, put the toddler creative to bed, and then the editor can come out and clean things up and make it right. So overall, what I've discovered in my journey as an artist, as a writer, and walking with artists and writers of all and all kinds of creatives, not just writers, that the besetting sin is sloth. Somehow they never get around to doing the thing they're called to do. And that kind of relates to what I spoke about a moment ago. You want to do everything but. So there's an old joke among writers. Writers have the cleanest houses in the business because you think, well, let me just vacuum this, the living room here before I get started. And you know what? The dishes need to get done. And so why is it that we procrastinate? And sloth isn't doing nothing. Sloth is doing what you're not supposed to be doing. So slothful people are usually the busiest people. You're doing everything in the world except the thing you're supposed to do. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, if you're doing the thing that you're called to do, it's because it is literally written in the design of your very being. And so if you say to yourself in the world, I am a writer, well, what happens if I write and I'm not any good? And if I'm not any good, then I guess I'm not really a writer. And then the whole sense of worth and value collapses. And so really the first lesson that has to be learned is, it's not your writing that gives you value. You have value. The source of your value comes from something eternal and substantive. We are all sons and daughters of the King. God is the one who gives us our value and our worth. Christ stepped out of heaven, took on the form of a slave, put on the beetle suit and ran around in the dung with the rest of us beetles to tell us how valuable we really were, that we weren't dung beetles, that we were actually, sons and daughters of God. And so once you realize that your value and your worth and your identity and your purpose isn't the writing, the value and the identity is your place as a child of God, and that in grateful response to that, you say, yes, Lord, whatever you'd have me do, I would do. And he will say, well, this is how I've designed you, and this is what I want you to do. So yeah, the fear happens when you start to say, my worth is what I put on the page. And if you fall into that trap, you're doomed. But for me, it's a daily reminder, because I'm spending far more time on the computer than I am, probably thinking of the things I should be thinking about. I'm thinking about things like, Glock 19s. So it's the tail starts to wag the dog, and that's always a problem. And so that's a daily fight.
So what advice would you give a writer that has decided, I want to write a book, I want to write my story? Give some advice on how they begin.
Well, there's an old saying, you have to learn how to write, but absolutely no one can teach you. And so really the only way to learn how to write is to write. That's the first rule I would have of writing. The second one is, again, steal from Hemingway. Hemingway, arguably one of the greatest writers of the English language, certainly reset how literature was written in the 20th century when he came on the scene. Hemingway said the first draft is always rhymes with the word spit.
Right.
In Koine Greek, skubala, which is a word Paul actually used. And so if for Hemingway the first draft is always spit, then our job as writers isn't to, question ourselves every single, comma and verb. It's to spit. So sitting in the chair and getting that first draft done is the absolute most important thing. If you write the most brilliant book that's only 90% complete and you never finish it, it doesn't matter. Only a finished book matters. So getting that first draft done is the absolute number one priority. And just briefly, I'd add to that, for me, I do daily word count. And so sitting in the chair or actually I stand a lot when I type, not allowing myself to go to bed until my word count is accomplished. Might take 18 hours, might take 3 hours, but full on commitment to get the word count done. And not editing as I go so much, but just having an outline, knowing where I'm going, and then charging full speed ahead. Because I know after I finish, and this leads to my last rule, in some ways, all writing is rewriting. But you can't rewrite what isn't written. So getting that first draft done is key. Get the first draft done, period.
Well, and for me, I started writing. I joined community college 50 plus class, and it was a memoir writing class, and it was wonderful for me because we sat in a group. Everybody I'm sorry, this keeps falling out of my ear. Everybody wrote a chapter, and then we'd critique each other, kindly critique, not professionally, and it was great to get feedback and hear, Joe, this is good, but you could probably say this better. So for me as a brand new writer, that was a wonderful stepping stone for me. And then, I do find that I ask people's opinion. Will you read this and tell me what you think? And not everybody is going to like my style of writing. And I've learned that you can get direction and opinions, to death. And, talk about when you get to a point that you do need an editor or you're ready for an editor. That was surprising to me, that editors work really hard and they change a lot of things in your writing. And so how would a new writer working with someone to edit, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's a really good question, too. I would really have to defer to you probably more on that. Every editing relationship is different. Some editors are very aggressive and, in a good sense, and hands-on, and they really, really, really want to help you shape what you're doing. I've been very fortunate that I had a 4-book deal with Penguin Random House, the drone series, and the series paperback editor was Tom Colgan, who I mentioned before, was actually the series editor for the entire Tom Clancy franchise, so he knew my work. Editing is its own art form. I completely believe in editing editors. But like you said, you can hand the same manuscript to 2 professional editors. I'm not necessarily the person who, you go to Craigslist and for $100 they'll edit your stuff. But I'm talking about like the seriously committed and trained and highly awarded and regarded editors. No 2 editors will treat the same manuscript the same way. And so if you're going to find an editor, find someone that you trust, who has the same taste as you. who's committed to not imposing their vision on your manuscript, but helping you make your manuscript and help you realize your vision. And that's what the best editors do. Editing is a fascinating process. I bet you had no typos in your manuscript, but it's amazing to me. I, of course, read everything. I'm semi-literate, I suppose. I have a computer with spell check. But after all of that, and I reread it, and even my wife reads the first draft, and she finds a gazillion more typos, and we pull all of those out. We actually do one more thing. We actually read the manuscript out loud. She reads it to me. Because when you actually read it out loud, you find all kinds of other kinds of faults. Also, by the way, audiobook sales are going through the roof. If you want a great audiobook, it has to sound good. And so when you actually read through your manuscript, you can actually start to make changes that might read well on the page, but there's a better way to say it so it sounds better if you're listening to it on speakers, for example.
Right.
But even going through all of that, then I send the manuscript off, and here it comes back with all these typos in it. It's like, where did those come from?
I know. I'll read and reread.
So copy editing is awesome. That's its own thing, but also the editorial, the big picture. And I have a very hands-off process. They look for if there's any major flaws, but otherwise they let me be myself on the page. I'm just very grateful for that.
I'm so proud of what you've done as my friend and brother in Christ, and it's so exciting. I am, as you know, a nurse, and we had a patient who passed away yesterday, and he was an avid Tom Clancy reader and just had his books. He loved Tom Clancy so much. He had the books in alphabetical order, and your books were in there too. So it was a proud moment for me as a nurse and your friend. It's just, I'm so excited about your book. I can't wait to read it. I haven't read it. I'll be going on vacation in a few days, and I do plan on reading it. My husband does too. And I wish you the very, very best, Mike. And thank you so much for your time and your advice and your courage for going forward and following your passion. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. It's so great seeing you again. I'm so excited for your podcast and all that you're doing. And yes, you've been a great friend to me and my family for a long time. And we are so blessed to have you in our lives and your family.
Same here.
Thank you for joining us on the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast, hosted by author Joe Alch. You can find more information on Joe's beginnings and the Lemon Tree at thelemontreebook.com.